Is it time to revise Quaker Faith and Practice, our Book of Discipline? Friends, Agenda Committee felt it would be helpful to begin our consideration of this question by sharing some of the thinking behind the yearly meeting sessions that we've offered you on this matter over the next few days. And we've worked very closely with the Book of Discipline Revision Committee, which has been a very valuable experience. So firstly, we wanted to allow this decision plenty of space and time. Space to hear stories of the journey that the revision preparation group have taken in coming to the recommendations that you have before you. Time for deep worshipful listening to one another and to the Spirit. Space to journey ourselves through the different aspects of a possible revision, from the profound theological issues to the particular issues of church government and how we organise ourselves. Space to hear concerns and worries, and time to be joyful and to get excited about our faith and our practice. Next, we hoped that yearly meeting would set the tone of the conversation. If we decide to revise Quaker Faith and Practice, or if we decide not to revise Quaker Faith and Practice, there are many other conversations we need to be having. We heard in our ministry this morning about the importance of deep listening, and this is among the skills that are at the core of our spiritual practice and that we can place at the centre of our yearly meeting sessions. So some of what we do will hope to model respectful deep listening and conversation between friends of diverging views. Next, we felt it was important to put any possible revision into context of the other issues in our yearly meeting and our world. When Agenda Committee met, as we always do, with representatives of committees and other bodies, we explored together themes around radical change, around who we are, belonging, privilege, around enabling full participation, whilst also passing on the treasures in our tradition. We invite these issues to permeate our consideration this weekend. Within a wider framework, the process of a possible revision, addressing the deep issues of our faith and our practice, not just a book, could become exciting, dynamic, and radical. We wanted to include in our planning lots of different ways of working. Together we're going to be learning, responding, threshing, discerning, and decision-making. So there will be different ways of working in our different sessions, and some of our sessions include prepared ministry with plenty of information. This morning is one of those, friends, when there'll be lots of prepared introduction. But other sessions will keep this to a minimum so that we can settle into worship together, and this afternoon session will be an example of that. In particular, after lunch today, there are a number of parallel sessions to give us the opportunity to respond in very different ways to different aspects of the questions. The options for parallel sessions are listed in agenda and notes, and there will also be the option of picking up some conversation questions that you can use in the Sunshine or the Conversation Hub informally with other friends around you. We're not planning to take formal reports back from the parallel sessions, but they will, in diverse ways, prepare our hearts and minds for what follows. The feedback will be you, friends, in what you each bring to the silence from what you've experienced or learnt. We've also been working very closely with Junior Yearly Meeting. They sent representatives to all of our meetings, and they are considering the theme, Quaker Faith in Practice. What are our beliefs and how can we express them? The Young People's Programme are considering the theme, Young Quakers Then and Now, within a diverse and changing world. Their programmes and the children's programmes contain similar themes to ours. The young people will join us this afternoon, and we expect to receive minutes of their consideration tomorrow. We may also receive contributions from the children's programmes. We have warmly welcomed the tremendous enthusiasm of young friends and young adult friends to be fully engaged in this decision-making process. So, friends, we begin with an introduction that sets the scene for us, and Lesley Richards, Clerk of the Book of Discipline Revision Preparation Group, will come to the lectern when she's ready.
For the last 4 years, I've been clerk of the Book of Discipline Revision Preparation Group, or RPG for short. As you know, yearly meeting in 2014 considered revising the current Quaker faith and practice was not so united, so Meeting for Sufferings set up the Revision Preparation Group to advise them, Meeting for Sufferings, about whether, again, to ask all of us, yearly meeting, about revising the book. We reported to them last December, advising them that the book needed revising and that it was time to ask again. This weekend, we will be spending time looking at the various issues that yearly meeting needs to consider in taking a decision whether to start revising or not. There has been a continuous history of revision since the manuscript version in 1782. But it's enough to make my point if we go through the last 100 years or so. Some feedback from a friend suggested that the books of discipline were like a family portrait, and from time to time they needed to be updated because the younger generation were missing. So I thought I'd illustrate the times when our books of discipline were updated with a series of family portraits of the specific Quaker family into which I've been accepted as an honorary member. The dates fit pretty well. So here is a photo of Robin and Connie Appleton on their wedding day in about 1921. The 1921 book was the first to use extracts of friends' writings, as they put it, to state truth, not by formulating it, but by expressing it through the vital, personal, and corporate experience of friends. At the time, there were 3 volumes: Christian Life, Faith and Thought, Christian Practice, and Church Government. A generation later, here are Robin and Connie again at their daughter's wedding, which roughly coincides with the 1959 version. Christian Life, Faith and Thought and Christian Practice were revised into Christian Faith and Practice. Here is the copy I was given when I joined the Society of Friends. Church Government, those chapters which lay out how things should be done in our local area and yearly meetings, was revised in 1906, 1917, I'm expecting a different picture. Back, that one. The Church Government, those chapters which lay out how things should be done in our local area and yearly meetings, was revised in 1906, 1917, 1931, and 1967. Again, here is my copy. It's much less tatty, not because it was revised more recently. I was given both at the same time. It's simply that I haven't read it as much. Even though I was monthly meeting clerk, I only read it when I needed to find something specific. It is important to remember at that time the majority of Quakers had grown up in the Society of Friends. The book has advice to clerks, but nothing which straightforwardly explains how a business meeting, a meeting for worship for business, actually operates and why we do things this way. It has nothing because it wasn't necessary at that time to state the obvious. The same cannot be said today when most of us, including myself, are convinced friends. It was in yearly meeting 1985 when the process of revision was started, which led to the current single book. And here are Robin and Connie at about that date at their granddaughter's wedding. No big formal photos here. The revision committee's remit at this time was not to alter the substance of church government, So it was reviewed and bits rewritten when it wasn't clear, but lots of the words of these parts were untouched. The committee added in some bits to address the need to explain what we do, but the actual substance was not revised. Our ways of organising our life together as Quakers was seen to be part and parcel of how we lived out our faith, so it seemed right for it to be part of a single book. The church government sections were reordered to become part of the new Quaker Faith and Practice, together with a selection of extracts that included old favourites along with new material. This book was approved by yearly meeting in 1994, but even before that revision started in 1985, there were signs that sticking to the letter of church government was difficult for small meetings. So we have at present this book, approved in 1994, but where many of the church government sections are 50 years old, and it reads like they are. To complete the series of wedding pictures, here is a photo of Robin and Connie's great-grandson's recent wedding. They're not there in person, of course, but their characteristic ways of approaching people are still very much in evidence in their descendants. Do we need a new Quaker faith and practice to include the next generation in our Quaker family portrait? Yes, we have one book with all the various different kinds of material, but that's not the end of the story. Largely because of changes in the law, there have needed to be changes. For example, when we needed to work out how trustees fitted into Quaker structures. We have editions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The marriage law changed to include same-sex marriage, so we have a new chapter 16 as a supplement. But that's still not the end. We did some minor updating yesterday evening. The Church Government Advisory Group continues to work hard. Nowadays, if you want to find out about Scottish prison visitors, or are they chaplains, you have to look online for the completely up-to-date version. And that's still not all. There's a whole lot of supplementary material that is not in the book. For example, there's a treasurer's handbook, looked after by the Stewardship Committee, and information on safeguarding is updated by the member of Friends House staff whose job it is to keep abreast of good practice. No one is suggesting that the correct name for Quakers who support Scottish prisoners, which is in the book, is more important than the principle of safeguarding our children, which isn't. It's just to do with the history of when these things were thought about. Minor updates won't sort out these inconsistencies, and this is one reason why we're recommending that we do a proper revision. In our current system, there's confusion about what needs to be in the book, approved by yearly meeting in session, and what material needs to be still publicly available, but doesn't need that level of authority. It might be approved by some other appropriate committee. What we're suggesting is that we make it clear where we draw the line so that we have core material in the book and supplementary material in another format. We will be looking at this in detail in the second half of Sunday morning. RPG, us, started by deliberately trying not to take a view about whether revision was necessary. It was when we looked closely into the church government parts, speaking to friends involved in all sorts of ways, that we united as a group in agreeing that a revision is necessary. This focus on listening to others' views has been integral to our committee's ways of working. One of the first things we worked on was the the project to get friends to actually read their book of discipline. The thinking was twofold. When the question is, does this book need revising? You're better placed to answer if you read it fairly recently. Our second reason was to help friends to explore all sorts of aspects of their life together, listening lovingly to each other, talking about God, about our faith. The uptake of the Reading Quaker Faith and Practice project was way beyond our expectations. Let's try it out. Could you raise your hand if some friends in your meeting have been involved in reading Quaker Faith and Practice in the way we set out in our project? Wow. It would seem that many, many meetings have that experience, which means that this time when we discuss our book at yearly meeting, we have mostly read it, not just cherry-picked our favourite bits, but explored its dustier corners as well. The slideshow in here over our short break will show quotes from feedback to that project. As I have explained, there are problems with how we set out the way in which we organise our religious society. There is no consistency in how we deal with different issues. It's largely a matter of historical accident, which bits are decided in a full yearly meeting session and which bits are approved by some other group of friends on our behalf. Approving every little change about every detail in a yearly meeting session would not be the best use of our time together. And I confess that making those changes is about the least favourite bit of yearly meeting for me. The revision preparation group are recommending that this structure needs tidying up. We suggest that we think in terms of core and supplementary material. The core would consist of a description of why we do things the way we do, for example, how we hold a business meeting and why we do it this way. The supplementary material would contain advice to clerks about how to draft minutes, how to keep adequate records, etc. If you take the new chapter 16 on marriage, the first section appears to contain the core material on the Quaker understanding of marriage. The other sections are mainly details about who does what and might be published separately as supplementary material. The first is rightly the business of yearly meeting. The second might be more appropriately the responsibility of some other group, such as Meeting for Sufferings. Both need to be in the public domain. Friends have explained that they want a book that they can have to hand in Meeting for Worship. But there are other platforms which we already use. The technology will continue to change, but we already make use of electronic ways of ensuring that this material is available and it enables people to access the most up-to-date information. If the first reason for recommending revision was that church government is not working well in some of our meetings, particularly the smaller ones, we wondered whether revisions should stop there. In 2014, when yearly meetings started thinking about revising, one of the issues that really worried friends then was referred to as theism, non-theism. When our group was set up, the issue was one of the main things we were asked to look at. RPG is very clear. This is not a helpful way of naming the issue. It suggests two opposing points of view, where the reality is that friends have a multitude of different ways of understanding their Quaker faith. For me, for many of us, the word God is a valuable shorthand for an important part of our faith tradition. We can value God as a passionately real part of our daily experience, as a treasured part of our history, even if we struggled to relate to the word for ourselves, or as part of the experience of others which we love because we love those friends. A binary split, yes, no, doesn't begin to describe the richness of where our religious society of friends is today. Our group, RPG, referred to the issue as one of religious differences. Friends have already done a lot of work on religious differences in reading Quaker Faith and Practice together. Our other approach to the issue was to bring together a group of 20 or so friends with a particular interest in theology, the Theology Think Tank. It is a report of the conversations of that group that form the content of God, Words and Us, which was part of the recommended reading for the spiritual preparation for this yearly meeting. Shall I try it again? Put up your hand if friends in your meeting have read God, Words and Us. Now that is even more remarkable. Thank you. Having listened to both the feedback to the reading project and to the Theology Think Tank, RPG have come to a view that what Quakers share is a willingness to speak and to listen open-heartedly, not just with our brains, but with our hearts as well. Listening open-heartedly to someone you agree with is relatively easy. It's when what you're hearing is not what you would say, or not how you would say it, that the challenge lies. We talk of trying to say what is on our heart, and doing this in such a way that other friends have a chance of hearing with their hearts is difficult. It's not simply that you're using different words that they may find uncomfortable. What you're trying to say may in itself be different from the understanding of the friend you're talking to. How can you speak and listen open-heartedly when the substance of the other's understanding is different from your own? Is it something to do with listening to where the words come from? Certainly, the mindset that if you don't agree with me, you're both wrong and stupid is not going to lead to successful communication heart to heart. In the 1989 Swarthmore lecture, Jocelyn Burnell talked about the difficulty of helping students get their heads around the idea that subatomic particles sometimes behave as if they're solid particles and sometimes as if they're waves. Does this comparison help to explain how very different experiences, different understandings, can yet be compatible? Aiming to speak and listen in this way, rather than a particular understanding of God and other theological matters, is what is distinctive about our Quaker approach. It's not a cop-out. It is very difficult. But it is in line with the traditional Quaker question, what canst thou say? Our religious differences form the basis for this afternoon's considerations. I'd like to tell you about an exchange in my local Churches Together committee meeting. You have to understand that we have a rather forceful, strongly evangelical rector. It fell to me to explain why some of us had difficulty with what he was proposing. When I had done, his response was, "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." Our chairman, bless him, said, "No, I can believe they haven't said that sort of thing to you. But I can also believe that they have said it to Lesley. I was left asking myself if I was also a person to whom people would never say particular sorts of things. I think the honest answer is yes. I can be. In this particular role on RPG, however, friends have said such a variety of different things to me that I think I've managed this time mostly to listen, not just respectfully, but open-heartedly. So what we're recommending through Meeting for Sufferings is that we don't just do half a job, revising just church government. We recommend that the whole book needs looking at. We recommend that we try to separate more clearly the core parts of church government, how we hold business meetings, what we understand by marriage, etc., which will be an integral part of the new book. Supplementary material would be elsewhere and have the appropriate authority. We recommend that we see our differences as richness, not as some kind of flaw. And finally, we would like to encourage any revision committee to be creative. Now I would like to speak personally about how I feel about the possibility of revising our Book of Discipline, not as clerk to the committee. The picture shows a road near me where a pothole has been patched, and then more holes have appeared round the patch that have themselves been patched. Now another pothole has appeared nearby. There will come a time when patching the patches just won't do. Resurfacing with another layer of tarmac isn't enough either. They will have to do a proper, more radical job. We will complain when they do, because it's right by the main set of traffic lights just on the way into town. But it is necessary if there's to be a more satisfactory solution that overall will cost less. These potholes are close to my home. I'm sure you can think of bits of road near you that are in the same state. And so is our church government. I believe the point has come when patching the patches just won't do. Resurfacing isn't enough either. We have to do a proper, more radical job. We will complain about it, but it is necessary if there is to be a satisfactory solution that overall will cost less. In this case, the cost is the cost of our time in trying to make things work. As I explained, one of the pieces of feedback to the reading project likened the Book of Discipline to a family photo. We need a new one because younger members of the family weren't in the old photo. This is a photo of me at about the time our yearly meeting was beginning to think about starting the revision process that led to our current book. I was the youngest member of the department at work. I had my career before me. My colleagues were all single, white, childless, grammar school or private school educated, middle class, comfortably off, and, at least publicly, we were all straight. The next photo shows me with my work colleagues today. I'm semi-retired, at the end of my career, and the oldest person in the photo by more than 10 years. We are married, single, living with a partner, living with several generations of our family, with adult children, teenage children, young children, babies, and sadly even a couple of miscarriages. We are not all white, straight, or comfortably off. In the intervening years, I've experienced a lot, learnt a lot, and the world has changed around me. Only one other person in my department knows the dry feeling of having your hands covered with chalk dust, though most would recognise the squeal of a piece of chalk sometimes makes. In other areas of my life too, a lot of water has flowed under the bridge, and I've changed. This includes my religious life. I'm recognisably the same person, and yet I'm not the same. I've moved on. Basically, what I'm trying to say to those of us who remember the last revision is that I've grown older, and so have you. What is true for me as an individual is also true of the wider society, as well as for the Society of Friends. The photo of the Religious Society of Friends in our current book is out of date, not only because it's missing the younger friends and newer friends, it's missing that wider range of life experience amongst us. And it's out of date because older friends have changed too. I find that change exciting. I'm enthusiastic about what we will learn if we embark on the adventure of revising our book together.
Good morning, friends. If I can handle this weekend, just about anyone can. I don't do change very well. You should have heard me on the proposed changes to this room. The old space had been my yearly meeting since I was 11. I remember the cardboard image of what was coming, the architect's drawings, the plans seemingly decided by others, and a long train journey home from yearly meeting when I moaned the whole way about the proposed changes. The first time I walked in here after the renovations, I came alone. I didn't want anyone else near me when I faced such a loss. But wow, it's a superb space. My first yearly meeting in the light showed me that it's not about the room that we worship in. It's about the openness to the Spirit. It's about our willingness to open our hearts, to be still, and to listen, not to our preconceived ideas, not to our fears, but to God and to the love between us. When I first received the letter from Central Nominations asking if I was willing for my name to be considered for the revision preparation group, I immediately phoned Christine Davis. I grew up in Dunblane Meeting, and Christine was my Quaker port of call. We didn't always agree, because we were, and are, both strong and outwardly confident. But we shared a bond and an understanding that I am so grateful for. Christine was important in so many ways to many people. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a confidant, an oracle, a clerk, a committee member, a public servant, and much more. She served our yearly meeting as clerk from 1991 to 1994 as we went through the last revision. With Jocelyn Burnell as first assistant clerk, they helped us through some tricky and sometimes painful sessions. Friends, is this broadly acceptable? Springs to mind. I was a young friend at all these sessions and valued every moment. Back to the RPG potential nomination. My thoughts on this were, why me? Is this to tick the young-ish Scottish box, I shared my concerns with Christine. Surely everyone knew how much I loved this book and wouldn't want it to change. We had a long talk. Christine wondered if my name had come up for the very reasons that held me back, so I decided to accept. I arrived at the first meeting of the committee feeling an outsider. It was obvious to me that all the rest of the committee had either decided that the book needed to be revised or were yes men people to those in Friend's house who had decided that it needed to happen. I was sure that there was a plot to change the Red Book in ways that I would not be happy with. I felt there were people in power that could make things happen even if I didn't want them to, or others didn't want them to. My plan was to stick a spanner in the works of this process. I felt we were not ready. Friends had indicated just this at yearly meeting in session at Bath. I felt the current book met my needs well. I felt there were more important things to be spending our time, money, and people's energy on. But as it turned out, I was not the only person on the committee feeling negatively towards a revision. However, much as I tried to stick out my spanner, the work we undertook very intensely and very conscientiously on your behalf led me easily and reasonably quickly to the conclusion laid out so carefully by Lesley just now. The first step to this move of my position was when we looked closely at the church government parts of the book. It became clear to me that many of them were no longer fit for purpose. Following this mellowing and growing understanding that Friend's House and all the super staff and committee members working on our behalf are not the enemy, far from it. Very far from it. I came to see that there are gaps in the book that needed filled. Indeed, you highlighted many of these in the consultation with area meetings in 2013. Where are the words on experience of assisted dying, marriage breakdown, being transgender, sustainability, climate change, and more? I feel now it's very important to acknowledge any concerns or worries that some of you may have. Some of you will have been thinking about this for a while. Some may be in the room unsure of what's going on. Some will be in a panic about your favourite parts that they may be taken out. And some may be worried about a change of language. I think this is about trust and communication. If you decide that the time is right for revision, a committee will be set up to do this work on our behalf. You know how this works. We pray hard and trust in God, our discernment processes, and our careful nominations procedures. The new committee prays hard and works harder. The result we will wrestle with in yearly meeting sessions a few years from now. I've had 3 and a bit years to get my head round this. I feel excited that we might be about to start on a very special journey. You have a weekend. For some, it'll be a no-brainer. For others, it could be very difficult. I feel this book is one of my connections to Christine. I feel it's my book. It's my generation's book. However, I know it needs to change, to have a new photo, to move on in a dignified and loving way. We're not going to lose this book. It will still be on our shelves, by our beds, on our tables in our meetings for worship, guiding us, connecting us, and being our link. We have roughly 25 minutes now to worship together, to consider how our hearts are responding to this challenge before us.